Just let it go. I'll just have to crawl out of here the same way I came. Yeah, that's nice to know. It's nice to know. And I hope someday, and I pray someday, that this anger fades, that it burns away. And I hope someday, and I pray someday, that this anger fades, that it burns away. And I hope someday, and I pray someday, that this anger fades, that it burns away. And I hope someday, that's told. It's just another lie. It's just another lie. It's just another lie. Time is a that's told. It's just another lie. Flames still burn behind you, you can't put them out. There were just too many moments left you full of doubts. You keep trying hard to stand, but the past lets you down. Praying that you make it till you feel the higher ground. Until you feel the higher ground. Until you feel the higher ground. Praying that you make it till you feel the higher ground. Until you feel the higher ground. Until you feel the higher ground. Praying that you make it till you feel the higher ground. Until you feel the higher ground. Until you feel the higher ground. Praying that you make it till you feel the higher ground. Until you feel the higher ground. Until you feel the higher ground. Praying that you make it till you feel the higher ground.
So we're going to look at two stories from Scripture that talk about and give us examples of horizontal forgiveness, and the other will give us an example of vertical forgiveness. Horizontal forgiveness is an Old Testament story about David, well, actually King David and King Saul. David at this point had been anointed king, but Saul was the acting king. The specific story we're going to look at, we find in 1 Samuel 24. I'm not going to read the story. I'm going to suggest that you read that chapter and read the account that's given there. Saul was extremely jealous of David, and at the point that this story takes place, he basically destroyed David's life. He'd taken his wife, he destroyed his reputation. David is on the run, and he's on the run with some other people who Saul has destroyed their lives as well. And we find David in a cave in En-Gedi, which the cave of En-Gedi is near an oasis out in the middle of the desert, a beautiful oasis that's there even today. You would travel for miles through this barren desert, and all of a sudden this oasis of palm trees and cool water and a waterfall and just lush, it's there. And so David has been running from Saul for his life because Saul wants to kill him. And instead of being down in this oasis, David's up in this cave with his men. They're just trying to stay alive. Saul and his men are down in the oasis. The one who's unrighteous is experiencing the beautiful, lush oasis. David's in the dark. Unforgiveness does that. It puts us in the dark. It puts us in a cave-like atmosphere. As chance would have it, Saul has to relieve himself. He has to do his business, and he walks into the very cave where David's hiding. Scripture would indicate he's in there for a while so he can figure out what he's doing. He walks into David's cave. David's men look at him and said, "Look, God has put Saul in your hands. You can go do to him as you want. He's in a vulnerable position. You can just walk right out there right now and kill him." David creeps out quietly. Saul is out there, and he's got to decide, what am I going to do? I could end this right now. I could end this guy coming after me. I could end all my problems if I take justice into my own hands right now. And God speaks to him, and David does not kill Saul. He takes his sword, cuts a little corner off of Saul's royal robe, and sneaks back into the cave. Saul finishes up, he goes outside, and David walks out to the mouth of the cave. And Scripture tells us he even regrets having cut off that little piece of Saul's robe, because he realizes it humiliated Saul. And he realizes even though he has a legitimate problem with Saul, he doesn't even have the right to humiliate him. He's taken something into his own hands that wasn't his to do. But what he does do, Saul's walking out and David calls out to him. He says, Saul, holds up the piece of the robe. He says, you were in my hands, and I chose to let you live. And you can read the story, but Saul turns and says, David, you're more righteous than I am. Saul is going back and forth with his feelings because David at one point was like a son to him, and now he's at odds with him. He tells him, you're more righteous than I am. And he says, I'm going to take my men and go home. He leaves. David and his men go back into the cave, and they stay there. And we pull a number of principles out of what this horizontal forgiveness is like. They're right here in Scripture, and they're the same things that we have to abide by today when we forgive somebody. Same process 4,000 years ago as it is today. Hasn't changed. So if we look at this passage, one thing we can see is forgiveness is not forgetting. If we look at verse 4 in here, David is not, at this point, forgotten everything that Saul's done to him. He remembers he's got a wife back in Jerusalem that Saul's given to somebody else. He's well aware he's on the run and he's in the cave and Saul is out there in the lush oasis. He has not forgotten what's happened. Forgiveness doesn't mean you no longer feel the offenses of what somebody has done to you. David still feels that pain, even when he knows, hey man, I can't humiliate Saul. I can't kill him. You can look at verses 9 and 10 in this passage, and you can see that David is struggling with that. He realizes that pain is there. I have to let this go. Another thing, forgiveness doesn't mean you don't want justice. You still can legitimately long for justice. You just have to let God execute that, whether that is through time, through the court system, through whatever is there. It's not for you to grab that justice and that vengeance in your own hands. Verses 12 and 13, David actually says, listen, I'm waiting for the day that God executes justice on you, but I'm not going to be the one to do it. God will be. Forgiveness does not mean you make it easy for the person to hurt you again either. We see in verse 22, he's forgiven Saul. He's let it go. He's chosen to not seek vengeance. He's put that in God's hands. But he doesn't go back to Jerusalem with Saul. Even though Saul has said, I'm sorry, David does not put himself in a position for the same thing to happen over again. He stays with his men in that cave and waits for Saul and his men to leave and go back to Jerusalem. But David doesn't go back with him because that would have been foolish at that point in time. Forgiveness is rarely a one-time event. A lot of times we think, I've forgiven the person and now that should be done with. But the reality is it keeps coming back. We'll even see in David's life and his relationship with Saul that just, a few chapters later, almost the same situation happens again. At this point, Saul invites David back to Jerusalem, and David says no, because Saul doesn't have a repentant heart, and Saul hasn't exhibited that he's going to change. You have to see that happen over time. And also, the pain is still there for David. He hasn't forgotten. He still feels the pain. The justice hasn't been executed. And Saul hasn't really changed. The only thing that's changed is that forgiveness has changed David internally. He is letting God work, and as much as possible, and leaving this situation to God. He's dropped it, placed it in God's hands. And with that comes a power that we'll see Saul doesn't have. He becomes weaker and weaker, and David becomes stronger and stronger. And that's what forgiveness does for us. It strengthens us.
In the cool of the day, We talked earlier in this segment about horizontal forgiveness. We're going to take a minute now and discuss vertical forgiveness, this forgiveness that God offers to us. It's between God and man. I've been reading in Luke chapter 23 about Christ's journey to the cross. And getting to verse 34, where Christ says, he utters a prayer and he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. It's just an incredibly profound moment. And I think in order to be able to fully comprehend the importance of that moment, I think we have to think about what he encountered in the moments, in the hours before that. The moment that he encountered in the garden where his friend betrayed him and gave him over to the authorities. What he experienced when a friend of his, a very close friend of his, denied even knowing him. When the temple leaders turned him over to the governing authorities and were so full of hatred and they despised him. The flogging, the beating, the chastisement that he went through, the crown of thorns that was thrust on his head, being spat on, being humiliated, and then finally somebody driving nails into his hands and into his feet and affixing him to a cross. And it was in that moment, and it was in that pain, physical pain and torment that he was going through, that he looked out at everybody and said, with a tremendous amount of love, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. A tremendous amount of love for the guy who nailed his hands to the cross. Love for the person who spat on him. Love for the first person that started the chant, crucify him. Love for his friend that betrayed him. Love for everybody in that crowd. Love for the dealer on the corner. Love for the mom who's abandoned her kids or chosen drugs over kids, over her family. Love for the white supremacist. Love for the child molester. Love for the liar. Love for the person who just told this little tiny white lie that didn't seem like it would be a big problem. Love for the people that gossip and slander other people's names. It's hard to comprehend that kind of love. But I invite you to sit and consider it and ponder it. It was that love that inspired that prayer. Father, forgive them, because they have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea the ramifications of their decisions. They have no idea what they're doing. Damage that they're doing to themselves, the damage that they're doing to other people. Forgive them. We're told in Romans chapter 8 that Christ sits at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for us, all of us. Still, he's still petitioning the Father. Father, forgive them. They just don't know what they're doing. And the thing that I think it's important that we need to understand is God's forgiveness for us. This vertical forgiveness, God forgiving man, is instantaneous. It's out there. He already offers that forgiveness because of what Christ did on the cross, because of those nails. The offer is already there, and it's instantaneous because we only have to receive it. We don't have to wait for God to extend it. It's already extended, that offer of forgiveness and grace. We just have to be humble enough to receive it and come to him in humility and accept this vertical forgiveness from God to us. And I think as we do that, it's important to realize and understand that God forgives us instantaneously, but it doesn't make everything that we did just magically okay. There's still consequences. There's still repercussions for our actions. Some of those repercussions are damaged relationships with others. It doesn't just fix that, but our relationship with him is restored, which was his goal all along, to have a restored, renewed, healed relationship with you. That's what this vertical forgiveness is about. It doesn't
just make these other relationships better. It doesn't fix everything. In order to fully walk in and understand and abide in this forgiveness, we have to be able to forgive those that have wronged us. We have to be able to forgive others. There's a writing by Dr. Tara Samples that says, "Forgiveness is not a momentary impulse achieved or a chosen denial of reality. Forgiveness is often not reconciliation. Forgiveness is the hard way to freedom. Forgiveness doesn't come because of the demands of a perpetrator. It doesn't come because of the mandates of a religious authority. It's not a one-time choice. Rather, forgiveness is a pathway to healing. But before healing can begin, there's often much lamenting to be done."
Sometimes it's trouble when the oil light is on. You thought that you were right, but you found out you were wrong. They show you the door 'cause you don't belong. You try to be tough, but you really know it's strong. If you drift too far, you can always cross that bridge. If you lose yourself, you can always cross that bridge.